The year was 1791, and a bunch of revolutionaries got together and ratified 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, amendments known collectively as the Bill of Rights. Amongst those amendments, the second, which protects an individual's right to keep and bear arms. Fast forward 227 years, and the star of 1980's sitcom Who's the Boss wants you to know that those amendments are irrelevant because they're like really old. On Monday, Samantha Micelli, aka actress Alyssa Milano, tweeted this out, in which she explains that cholera, smallpox, and dying in childbirth were also, quote, popular in 1791, the year the Second Amendment was adopted. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think dying in childbirth was ever popular. But before you waste too much time trying to make sense of what she said, let me save you 40 seconds. This is absolutely absurd. But in the wake of yet another tragic mass shooting, the absurd occasionally rises to the top. What Milano tweeted may be inane, but what's problematic is that other inane ideas masquerade as serious and actually get considered. People say all kinds of crazy things in a desperate attempt to, quote, do something. Here on the show, we've been highlighting some possible, well-considered, potentially life-saving solutions from the left, from the right, and everywhere in between. And I'll continue to highlight those solutions because I think it's an important conversation. I'm not afraid of having it. But here's the deal. I want you to be very aware of one narrative that pops up over and over and over again. It's this idea that no one is talking about taking your guns away. You'll hear it all over the news. You'll hear it from lawmakers. They'll dismiss the idea that taking your guns away is what anyone is talking about. But you should know that anytime someone says they're not talking about taking your guns away, what they mean is they're talking about taking your guns away. How do I know this? Because I listen. I listen when someone says this.
I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in people's lawful right to bear arms. I will not take your shotgun away. I will not take your rifle away.
And I also listen when they say this.
We should restore the ban on military-style assault weapons and a 10-round limit for magazines.
I listen to people when they say this.
I'm not here to take away your guns. I just don't want you to be shot by someone who shouldn't have a gun in the first place.
And I listen when they also say this.
And I think it's time to restore the ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines.
I listen to the news when they say things like this.
Nobody wants to take their shotguns away. Nobody wants to take their handguns away. They can't because that's unconstitutional now because of Heller. Because of D.C. versus Heller in 2008. They can't do it.
And I continue to listen when in the very next breath they then say this.
We need to take away these weapons of war. Look at these mass shootings.
I listened to Senator Dianne Feinstein, who introduced an assault weapons ban last year, saying she only wants to take away the bad ones. But I also listened to her in 1993 when she told the Associated Press that, quote, banning guns addresses a fundamental right of all Americans to feel safe. When columnists like so-called conservative Bret Stephens take to the pages of the New York Times and say it's time to repeal the Second Amendment, I listen to that and believe him. I listen when in response to the shooting in Florida, State Senator Gary Farmer tweets, they're in the Capitol. These kids will be lobbying both chambers today for common sense gun safety legislation. So what's he talking about when he wants common sense gun laws? Well, he says we need an assault weapons ban in Florida. The time for change is now. They'll say they're not coming for your self-defense gun or for your hunting rifle. But this is where definitions really matter and why the term assault weapon is so odious and slippery. It's such an ambiguous term that neither the federal government nor individual states have a single definition. The 1994 ban defined an assault weapon as a rifle or pistol that has a detachable magazine and at least two other military features like a bayonet mount, flash suppressor, or a pistol grip. Most of those features are cosmetic and don't necessarily make a gun more powerful. States that have assault weapons bans don't even agree on what they are and define them differently. Maybe that's why people like Joe Scarborough are now calling them weapons of war. an even more ill-defined and vague but scary-sounding term. So it's completely possible that an assault weapons ban would make your hunting rifle or self-defense handgun illegal. This stuff matters, and anyone who says it doesn't is just trying to bully you away from facts and toward fist-shaking emotion. Over the coming days, weeks, maybe even months, you will hear a spectrum of proposals to prevent more mass shootings. In fact, just an hour ago, the president announced he's directed Attorney General Jeff Sessions to propose regulations that would ban bump stocks, devices that turn ordinary rifles into automatic weapons. That's good. We welcome all these proposals. But there is nothing more disingenuous than the idea that no one is talking about banning guns. So let's just have that conversation and get everyone's cards out on the table. All right, let me bring in CNN political commentator and conservative radio host, Ben Ferguson. Ben, we have heard this all before. We can go back to all the times, whether it was 94 and the assault weapons ban, where lawmakers did actually propose banning our guns. Why should we believe them now when they say they're not talking about banning guns?
Well, you shouldn't believe them because their whole entire premise is based on what guns they believe look scary to them, regardless of what the gun actually does. I mean, we've seen the guns that they want to ban. They put them up on walls. They had to get special permission to bring them into Washington, D.C., to then show them off to the media of the scary-looking guns that they wanted to ban. Regardless of the caliber, if it looked bad or looked like their new term, weapons of war, they want to ban it. So I don't trust them. Most importantly, because I don't think they even understand weapons. They don't understand that an AR-15 can also look like the same gun that is actually a .22 caliber white rifle. They don't understand how they work. If they want to have an honest conversation about gun laws, let's talk about the bump stock. I said I was in favor of the bump stock being banned because it's not a gun. It's not infringing on my Second Amendment right. You want to have an honest conversation about an 18-year-old. Should an 18-year-old be able to buy a AR-15, or should that age be at 21, for example? I'm willing to have that debate. A 21-year-old can't buy a handgun. Should they be able to buy an AR-15? Let's have that discussion. But when you go out there and you sell false hope to parents in Florida this week by saying, this is why we need to close, for example, the gun show loophole, when the gun show loophole would have nothing to do with stopping this individual from buying all of the guns he bought them legally without a gun show loophole. You're pushing a political ideology ahead of actual laws that could make a difference.
Well, and as I've also pointed out many times, between 2008 and 2010, the Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, the White House, and passed no gun control. The memory of 1994 and losing 54 House seats after passing that assault weapons bill is very fresh. But do you think that in light of this tragedy and the emotions surrounding it, we might actually see gun bans passed into law?
I certainly think you could see them on the state level. I think there's a real possibility there. You look at these students that are on buses right now in Florida going to the Capitol. There's a lot of politicians that are feeling this pressure for knee-jerk reaction that I also believe is a false sense of security and hope. Let's remember one of the first major school shootings we saw was in Jonesboro, Arkansas. There wasn't any of these guns that they had up, Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, put on that wall in Washington that were used in that school shooting. So my question is, you go out there and let's say you ban the AR-15. This individual had another 10 different or 9 different guns that we know of that he bought legally. You think he's not going to do this crime because you took away one of his guns?
Well, no, and of course we know during the assault weapons ban, Columbine happened with one of the very guns that was banned. As I've just laid out, lawmakers and pundits are constantly talking about gun bans. But they're not the only ones, of course. If you look online where actual people are engaging one another, there is constant discussion of gun bans and praise for mass gun confiscations like the one in Australia. I mean, do the people who say nobody's talking about this need to do a little bit more homework on this issue? Plenty of people are talking about it.
Yes. Well, there's two things that I always say about this issue. This was not a negotiable right that our founding fathers gave us. Not only did they say we had the right to bear arms, but they also said that it was not just that, it was the right to form militias. And in their mind, that was to actually be able to rise up or protect ourselves against a government which they had fled.
Ben, a critic is going to tell you right now that, you know, that's not a very modern, you know, interpretation anymore, and that we should just, you know, cut that part out of the Constitution. What would you say?
I'll also say this. Look at our founding fathers and what they were doing with their own guns. They were on the cutting edge of technology to try to make them bigger and more powerful so that they could protect and defend themselves. And again, the right that they gave us as American citizens was not something that was to be negotiated with. It didn't say we can ban any gun we want to as long as you're able to have one gun. I mean, let's go back to Barack Obama. You played it a moment ago. I'll let you keep your shotgun or your hunting rifle. What's his definition of a shotgun that I'm allowed to keep? Is it single shot? What's the definition of a hunting rifle? I do not trust them with those definitions because every time they want to ban something that was used, they don't know them. They don't understand how they work either.
So nobody's going to, I'm not worried people are going to take Alyssa Milano very seriously on this issue, but yesterday we did discuss an idea. We discussed an idea to surveil the entire country. Andrew Ross Sorkin in the New York Times today proposed that banks and the financial industry prevent people from buying guns. I mean, don't some of these absurd ideas make it harder to focus on real preventative measures? Because those are probably going to be small and targeted, and they might actually work, as opposed to these flashy, crazy, unserious proposals that are going to get a lot of attention.
Yeah, of course. Look, I had a father that his daughter was in the school when the shooting took place that I talked to on my show yesterday, and he was a former law enforcement officer, and he said, what makes me so angry is how many people are talking about laws, pushing their political agendas over things that could have actually stopped this shooting from happening. And he said, when you talk about gun show loopholes that had nothing to do with how these guns were bought, when no one is talking about the mental health issue here and the fact that maybe we should change the age from 18 to 21 to buy an AR-15, those are things he said that we should be talking about. And he says, I'm not going to let my daughter and what she went through at this school be used for politicians to push their political agendas when it's the children here that we let down. Let's also remember, our government failed us. They say all the time, if you see something, say something. People should be outraged that from Mississippi to Florida, the FBI was contacted multiple times. The police went to this individual's house dozens of times. How in the world did we allow this to happen when this was clearly a preventable shooting, yet we pushed gun legislation instead of looking at everything that fell through the cracks that could have stopped this shooting from ever taking place?
Okay, Ben, thanks for coming on to discuss this. I'm sure we'll be talking about it again. Okay, from an emotional standpoint, it feels like the Parkland shooting has shifted the gun debate, but the polling suggests otherwise. I'll explain next. There's a popular idea in the media that last week's shooting represents a momentum shift in the debate over gun control, specifically banning so-called assault weapons, but there's little evidence to back that assertion up as of yet. Look, if this were easy, it would have been done already. It would have been done after Sandy Hook or Las Vegas or any other, but banning guns just doesn't actually have popular support, despite gun control enthusiasts telling you it does. According to a new Washington Post ABC News poll conducted in the aftermath of this tragedy, while Democrats overwhelmingly support a ban on assault rifles, only 45% of independents and 29% of Republicans support such a proposal. Now, to put that in perspective, that means the needle on this question has not moved at all in the past 2 years. The media and Democratic lawmakers can scold us all they want, but the country just isn't with them. Okay, let me bring in my table for tonight. Associate editor at Reason.com, Elizabeth Nolan Brown. Unfiltered contributor, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, Beckett Adams, and Unfiltered senior producer, Andy Levy. Andy, the country isn't with them right now, but could that change? Everyone's talking about the emotional aspect of this, and this being a tipping point.
Right. Yeah, it absolutely could. And look, there was another poll came out today from Quinnipiac showing that 67% of Americans favor an assault weapons ban.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it depends on how the question is phrased.
Sure.
And also on what you think an assault weapon is, as you guys were just talking about.
Question.
But the thing is, even if you argue that the momentum is on the side of the banners, we've sort of seen that before and it never goes anywhere. And you're not going to tell me that a Republican-controlled Congress is going to pass an assault weapon ban.
No.
There's just no way. Talk to me again. Talk to me again after November if the Dems win the House and the Senate. Maybe.
Well, I've said a million times. They didn't. They didn't do it when they had full control.
Now. It may not.
It may be, but they didn't after Sandy Hook either. Yeah. And we had a Democrat in the White House.
I like the Second Amendment repealers because I admire their honesty.
Right. At least they're consistent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have said before, look, the only consistent, intellectually honest position on this is that you want to ban all guns. I think that's wrong. That's in violation of the Constitution. But at least it's not one of these little things on the edges that wouldn't actually solve a problem. Beckett, David Brooks wrote a piece for the New York Times yesterday. He's getting a lot of flack on Twitter for it, but he said, if you want to stop school shootings, it's not enough to just vent and march. It's necessary to let people from Red America lead the way and to show respect to gun owners at all points. It's not, to his point, it's not about hurting our feelings. It's about literally calling law-abiding gun owners child murderers and then saying, come work with us.
Right.
I mean, does that have to stop?
The obvious problem with this is that it's such a heated and emotional debate. It's hard to figure out how to, because it's so big and difficult. It's hard to get forward when you're being told you have blood on your hands. You are why the children are being killed. We want to have a debate, at least for gun owners, that respects liberties while also talking about safety. But we haven't even gotten to that point. It seems there's such a strange sort of push and pull right now. At the same time that, say, Black Lives Matter is so big and important. We're talking about systemic racism in the police force and all that. And then you have other people saying Trump is literally a tyrant. You have a lot of the times a crossover. These same people are now saying, actually, and that tyrant and that systemic racism should be the only people having guns. So you're like, that doesn't seem to comport. It doesn't make any sense. So how can we address the safety issue when we don't trust the people who would be defining the terms?
Well, yeah, and the rhetoric. I mean, I watch cable news all day. Our network, other networks, and it's the same from almost every anchor. Republicans are the problem. The NRA is the problem.
Right.
Another point I think people don't really understand, or haven't yet, is that gun control advocates actually need the NRA to get any meaningful legislation passed. The NRA is what helped get background checks passed, a background check system in place. The NRA is what gave us a 5-day waiting period because the NRA supported it. So rather, Elizabeth, than demonizing the very people you need to help you march a bill through Congress, maybe invite them to the table and ask them, how do we craft meaningful legislation, ... that can pass?
Yeah, I think the problem is that we just get into this sort of toxic feedback loop, like you were talking about before, where people say, nobody wants to ban guns, but then clearly people are saying that. So then, then you have people saying, well, yes, you are, and here's why we shouldn't. And then we end up all debating the outer margins of this thing and debating why we should or shouldn't ban guns instead of, these other sort of more simple or the solutions. The same with the mental health thing. I mean, you have these people saying, well, we should talk about banning people with mental health issues from having guns. But how do you define that? I mean, does that mean anybody who's ever got a Xanax prescription can't get a gun?
Yeah.
And whenever you ask the people these questions, then you don't really get a lot of straight answers. You get just sort of...
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm a former NRA member. I left them a while ago because I didn't like the direction they were going in, and I really don't like a lot of the stuff they're doing now. But the thing is, the people on the left have to remember the NRA is powerful mainly because they have 5 million members. It's not.
Who's paying members?
It's not a shadowy cabal that like nobody. It's just this amorphous thing. No, it's tangible. It's 5 million people.
Would you demonize any other voting bloc that large? No, and that's what they are. They are a voting bloc, right? The AARP, exactly. Would you? No, you wouldn't, because that's dumb.
Yeah, it's bad politics.
It's politically dumb.
But it's great for fundraising, though. That's the thing.
Okay, up next, Mitt Romney is running for Senate, and he made it 4 days before flip-flopping on one of his promises.